The cafeteria smelled faintly of coffee and disinfectant, a combination that somehow felt both comforting and sterile. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting sharp reflections on the rows of tables and the shiny linoleum floor. Lunch hour was at its peak, and the room buzzed with a mix of laughter, chatter, and the occasional clatter of a tray hitting a table. Amid this organized chaos, she walked in, her camera bag slung carelessly over one shoulder, scanning the room for an empty spot. It wasn't just any ordinary day for her. She had come in search of a story, a moment worth capturing, something that went beyond the usual mundane coverage of everyday life. Her eyes darted from table to table, each one occupied by groups of people laughing, sharing, or eating in silence. And then she saw him. At the far corner, near the large windows that offered a view of the gray, overcast city beyond, sat a man in uniform. His posture was upright, yet relaxed, one leg crossed over the other. It wasn't just the uniform that caught her attention, it was that he had only one leg, the other replaced by a sleek prosthetic that gleamed subtly under the flickering lights. He didn't seem out of place, though he commanded the space around him without even trying. There was a quiet dignity in the way he held himself, a calmness that made everyone else's chatter seem almost intrusive. She hesitated, unsure whether to approach him or leave him be. Her instinct told her there was a story here, something deeper than the surface of a soldier in a cafeteria. The janitor noticed her hesitation first. An older man with graying hair and a kind, lined face, he was moving methodically between tables, wiping spills, arranging chairs, and occasionally glancing at the lone soldier in the corner. When her eyes met his, he gave a subtle nod, as if acknowledging that he too had noticed the unusual scene. Taking a deep breath, she approached the soldier's table. "Can a broken bar share this table?" she asked, her voice barely above the hum of the cafeteria. The janitor looked up from his mop, pausing mid-swipe. His eyes, sharp and perceptive, studied her for a long moment. And then he smiled, a smile that seemed to carry decades of experiences, regrets, victories, and secrets. "Of course," he said, almost as if the words were pre-written, waiting for the right person to hear them. Then, unexpectedly, he added, "But the question is, can you handle what sits at this table?" She blinked, caught off guard. What could he possibly mean? She glanced at the soldier, whose head tilted slightly toward her, his eyes calm, yet filled with something she couldn't yet place. On the table before him was a simple tray of bread, beans, a small portion of vegetables, and a cup of coffee steaming gently. Yet, the way it was arranged, each item carefully positioned as if it were part of a ritual, made it feel far more significant than its simplicity suggested. She took a tentative step closer and seated herself across from him. "A broken bar, I don't understand," she said softly. The soldier's voice was steady, measured, carrying the weight of experiences that words alone could never capture. "War changes a person," he said. "Not just the body, but the mind and soul. You see people at their worst. You see moments when trust is broken, and yet, you also see the rare glimmers of humanity that make you believe in hope again." Her eyes were wide, captivated by the raw honesty in his tone. "And the janitor?" she asked, glancing toward the older man who was now quietly arranging chairs nearby. He nodded subtly. "He saved more lives than you can imagine, though he never wore a uniform. Most people walk past heroes every day without even realizing it. But he broken bar, he showed up, every single day." The janitor caught her gaze from across the room and winked, a gesture that sent a shiver down her spine. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, yet there was an unmistakable warmth in it. "Sometimes heroism isn't about medals," the soldier continued. "It's about showing up, being kind when it's the hardest thing, protecting those who can't protect themselves." He did that, quietly, without anyone noticing. Her mind raced, images of small, everyday acts flashing through her memory. Strangers helping strangers, people standing up in moments no one else did. She realized, for the first time, how often true courage went unnoticed. "A broken bar, I want to tell your story," she whispered. "People need to know about this. About him, about a broken bar, all of it." The soldier leaned back, studying her carefully. "Stories like these, a broken bar, they matter. If you leave here and forget, you're part of the problem. Share it, tell it, Maybe it'll inspire someone else to choose courage over fear. That's the ripple effect. One story can change countless lives. She swallowed hard, feeling a lump in her throat. This was more than a story, it was a call to action. Her camera, which had felt heavy on her shoulder, now felt like a lifeline. She wanted to capture every detail, every nuance, every moment of this encounter. And yet, there was more she needed to understand, more she needed to feel before pressing the record button in earnest. The soldier took a slow sip of his coffee, steam curling around his face. "You want to know why I eat alone?" he asked suddenly. She shook her head. "Because solitude teaches things words cannot. Because the weight of memories can be too heavy to share with someone who hasn't experienced them. And because in silence, you learn to listen, really listen to the world and the people in it." Her curiosity deepened. "And what have you learned?" He placed his cup down, fingers lingering on the handle. "That life is fragile, that people are capable of both immense cruelty and boundless kindness, that heroes are everywhere, in uniforms, in janitors' overalls, in mothers, fathers, children, anyone willing to stand up when it's easier to walk away. And most importantly," he said, eyes locking onto hers, "I've learned that stories are the only way we keep the lessons alive. If no one tells them, the world forgets. That's why you're here. That's why this moment matters." Her pulse quickened. The janitor approached with another tray, setting a fresh cup of coffee in front of her. "Life is made of moments like these," he said softly, his voice warm and unhurried. "Moments where you see the truth of people, where you realize that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it's the quiet voice at the end of the day saying, I will try again tomorrow." She watched him, fascinated. Every word, every movement, seemed layered with hidden meaning. "Yeah, broken bar, I don't know how to thank you," she murmured. The soldier smiled faintly, a shadow of past pain flickering in his expression. "You don't need to thank us. Just remember what you've seen. Share it. Inspire someone else. That's the greatest gift." And in that moment, with the buzz of the cafeteria fading into a soft hum around her, she understood. This was more than a chance encounter, it was a lesson in humanity, courage, and the quiet power of being present. She had come looking for a story, but what she found was something far greater, a call to bear witness, to honor unsung heroes, and to make sure their stories were never forgotten. The janitor gave her one last knowing look before moving on to another table. The soldier finished his meal in silence, then stood, prosthetic leg gleaming in the light. He offered a small nod, almost a gesture of blessing, before walking toward the exit. She sat there, heart pounding, realizing that this moment at this single shared table would stay with her forever. And she knew one thing with absolute certainty: she would tell this story to the world. The cafeteria had quieted slightly after the lunch rush, leaving only the faint hum of conversation, the clinking of cups, and the occasional scrape of a chair. She sat back in her chair, heart still racing from the encounter with the soldier and the janitor. The words he had spoken, each carrying the weight of experience and unspoken battles, lingered in her mind. There was an urgency in his tone that made her feel simultaneously small and important. Small because of the vastness of what she didn't know, and important because, somehow, she had been entrusted with a story that could touch hearts. The janitor returned, a small tray in hand carrying another cup of coffee, this one aromatic and steaming. He placed it gently in front of her, the motion deliberate, careful, as if handling fragile memories rather than ceramic. "You know," he began softly, his voice barely above the hum of the cafeteria, "people look at me and think I'm just a janitor, someone who sweeps floors, empties trash, cleans tables. But most of what I do goes unnoticed. Most of the time, the world doesn't see the quiet acts of courage that keep it moving." She leaned forward instinctively, drawn by the sincerity in his words. "What do you mean?" she asked. Her voice was barely a whisper, afraid that louder speech might shatter the fragile gravity of the moment. He smiled faintly, eyes crinkling at the corners. "Every day, I witness choices that decide lives. A kind word at the right moment, a hand offered when someone's about to fall, standing up when it's easier to look away, a broken bar. These are the real battles. Most people never notice, or if they do, they dismiss them as small. But they aren't small, not in the slightest." Her mind wandered back to the soldier, the one-legged man whose presence had seemed both quiet and commanding. She thought about his words, "Heroes are everywhere, in uniforms, in janitors' overalls, in mothers, fathers, children, anyone willing to stand up when it's easier to walk away." The realization hit her in waves. The janitor and the soldier were two halves of the same truth. Heroism wasn't defined by medals or recognition, it was defined by presence, by perseverance, by the courage to act when no one else does. The janitor continued, his voice steady, almost rhythmic. "I once knew a young woman who wanted to tell stories, much like you. She thought no one would care, that her words would vanish into the void. But one day, she told a story about courage. About small acts that meant the difference between hope and despair for someone. That story spread, quietly, subtly. It didn't make her famous, it didn't give her a medal, but it changed lives. People acted differently because they believed differently, and that belief a broken bar, that belief is what shapes the world." The words struck her deeply. She realized that this wasn't just about capturing events on camera or recounting facts. It was about meaning, about connecting with the hearts of others in ways that could ripple outward, far beyond what she could see. "I want to do that," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "to tell stories that actually matter, that make people act differently, that a broken bar that inspire courage." The soldier, who had returned to the cafeteria quietly, took a seat across from her again. His presence, though calm, carried a weight that made every word he spoke feel like a lesson carved from experience. "It starts with noticing," he said. "Most people walk past life without seeing it. They hurry, distracted by noise, by fear, by convenience. But if you stop, truly stop, you notice the cracks, the moments of pain, the opportunities to make a difference. That's where stories live." Her eyes met his, and for a moment, silence held the space between them. It wasn't awkward, it was sacred. She felt the pulse of history in that silence, the echoes of battles fought and lives saved, small and large. She realized that this moment, sitting at this table, listening, it was as important as anything she could photograph or write down. It was the genesis of something far greater, the understanding that stories could transform. The janitor leaned closer, lowering his voice so that only she could hear. "People often think heroes are loud, visible, recognizable. But the real heroes are quiet. They are the ones who see someone struggling, who give without expectation, who stand when the world would prefer they kneel." That soldier there, he nodded toward the man with the prosthetic leg, he is a hero because he survived, and because he helps others survive too. But the real hero, the one who teaches us the value of kindness and courage in everyday life, that's sometimes the one who just brushes floors and keeps a watchful eye on the world. She realized with a jolt that the janitor had been guiding her understanding all along. His subtle gestures, his careful words, his calm presence, all of it pointed toward the fact that heroism wasn't always visible, but it was everywhere, if one only paid attention. She felt an overwhelming urge to tell the world, to make sure these lessons didn't fade into obscurity. The soldier smiled faintly, a shadow of past pain flickering in his eyes. "Every story counts. Every voice matters. If you leave this place and forget what you've seen, you're part of the problem. But if you share it, truly share it, you have the power to touch someone's life in a way no one else can. That's why you're here. Not by accident, but by purpose." Her fingers trembled slightly as she adjusted the strap of her camera bag. She wanted to capture everything, not just for herself, but for the countless people who might never meet the janitor, the soldier, or anyone else like them. She realized that this was more than journalism or storytelling, this was a mission. She had been entrusted with a seed, and it was her responsibility to nurture it, to let it grow into something transformative. The janitor poured another cup of coffee, setting it before her as a silent invitation. "You've got the curiosity, the empathy, the courage to carry this forward," he said. "All you have to do is begin. Start with this story, and then the next. Every person you inspire multiplies the effect. That's how change happens." She nodded, her heart swelling with determination. "I will," she promised. "I'll make sure people hear this. People need to know about the quiet heroes, about courage in small acts, about hope when it seems impossible." The soldier rose again, preparing to leave. His prosthetic leg glinted in the afternoon light filtering through the windows. "Remember," he said over his shoulder, Stories are the lifeblood of courage. They teach, they heal, they inspire. Don't let this one die with you. The janitor gave her one last knowing smile before moving to another table, his movements deliberate, patient, almost ceremonial. And if you like what you hear, he called softly over his shoulder, there are many more stories waiting. Subscribe, follow, stay curious. The world is full of people worth noticing. Her chest tightened, a mixture of awe and gratitude flooding her senses. She realized that her journey had only begun. This one table, this one conversation, had altered the course of her perspective forever. She felt an unshakable sense of purpose, an urgent need to act, to share, to honor the invisible threads of courage that connected every human life. As she packed her camera bag, she glanced toward the soldier, now walking into the sunlight outside. His figure, though ordinary in silhouette, seemed extraordinary in presence. She realized that heroism wasn't defined by grandeur or recognition, it was defined by choice, by presence, by the courage to stand in moments when others walk past. And now, it was her turn to stand, to share, to ensure the story lived beyond this table, beyond this moment, beyond the walls of the cafeteria. She took a deep breath, steadying herself, and whispered to no one in particular, I will tell this story, I will make it matter. And in that promise, in that resolve, she understood something vital. The world needed stories, and she had found hers. One table, one soldier, one janitor, and an ordinary lunch transformed into an extraordinary lesson in courage, humanity, and the quiet power of being present.